Vale. English, right?
Yeah, all English.
Okay. Well, thank you for the patience.
Thank you.
And welcome. I'm really excited actually to finally able to be here. It was like actually a couple of months to be able to schedule this talk. So hopefully you're going to enjoy it. And I really hope that you're going to learn something and have tons and tons of questions. Well, my name is Alicia Pérez-Porro, and I come from CREAF. CREAF is a research institution that we are based in the Autonomous University of Barcelona in Bellaterra, and we focus on ecology of climate change and biodiversity. We used to be basically exclusively forest, but not anymore because we grew dramatically since the 80s. So now we introduce ourselves as a research center on ecology. And inside CREAF, I'm the head of policy engagement and institutional relations, which is a new area that we created a couple of years ago because we realized that our role in policy was increasing and we needed someone dedicated to exclusively managing these topics. So today I'm going to try to give you a little bit of a big picture of what is science for policy, what is science diplomacy, what is all this lingo that we are hearing and sometimes even using without really knowing what we are saying, and a tiny picture of what we are doing at CREAF. So we live in this paradox nowadays, right? So it's this time in history that we are producing a crazy amount of information about nature. We never knew that much as today about nature. But on the other side, we are losing nature as fast as ever. So this is just like rough numbers from openalex.org. In green, you have nature. In blue, you have biodiversity. And in red, you have climate change. What I did was to look the number of papers published that had one of these words in the abstract and the title. So it's not like a super deep analysis, right? But it's just to illustrate the thing that I was just saying. And it's only I filtered from the 90s, right? 1990s until 2023. So as you can see, the number of papers, scientific papers in peer-reviewed journals published about these topics, biodiversity, nature, climate change, has been increasing dramatically, and it keeps going up. But still, we are in this climate crisis and biodiversity crisis despite all of this information. And why is that? And I don't have the answer, but I do have one thing to say. That is, producing scientific information is no longer enough. Just by doing research and publishing an article, we are not going to stop these crises, because what we need is to mobilize this information in order for this information to be used. So great, that's my talk. Let's do it. I can just leave because now we know what to do, right? It's so easy. Let's mobilize the information and that's it. So unfortunately, as you can imagine, it's not this easy. And we face many barriers. And some barriers are institutional, right? We have institutional fragmentation, which goes against coherence, coordination. We also have that in a lot of institutions, public institutions, there's low scientific and technical capacity. Then we have that there's not enough science policy interfaces that connect both worlds. There's weak links with community processes, with local knowledge, with indigenous knowledge. Fake news. We have a crazy amount of fake news creating this noise and interfering with communication. And these fake news are undermining the trust in science. Then, and you probably relate to this one, there's not academic incentives. If you are a researcher in an academic research institution, what do you gain by engaging in all of this? By engaging in this, you don't have the time to publish papers, which are the only things that nowadays are contributing for the advancement of your research career. So we need academic incentives. It's changing, but it's very, very slowly. Then we have communication gaps. We sometimes say that policymakers and researchers, we don't speak the same language, right? It's very difficult to communicate if you are from one world or the other one with each other. Then we have political resistance. Sometimes there are other interests, and those interests are a priority, and research and scientific information might not be a priority for politicians. Limited access to open information that is usable. We have lack of resources and skills for this translation from one side to the other one, and a very long etc. And I'm like, I could keep going and going and going, but there's no need because you got what I want to say. So what do we need to address all of these barriers? So to address all of these barriers, what we need is a paradigm shift. We really need to change how we are addressing this topic, from producing knowledge to enabling transformative change. So up until now, the model was linear. And the linear model says that you are a researcher, you do your research, you produce your information, and then you give this information to policymakers or decision makers, and you expect them to use this information because I'm a researcher. I know what I'm saying, and this is the truth. So why are you not using my information? Well, this is the linear process. And if we want to accomplish a transformative change, we cannot longer rely on this linear process. We need a collaborative process based in co-creation, based in communication. We need to know each other, and we need to co-create together value that then is going to help transform the society. And this is way easier to said than done, right? But things that are important from our side, from the science side, is that it needs to be policy relevant, but policy neutral and never prescriptive. This is the most important thing to remember. Never prescriptive, and always from this collaborative approach. So what is science diplomacy? What do you think is science diplomacy? You can talk. We can make this interactive because we are not a lot of people. Any ideas? There's no raw answers.
It's making the science understandable to the people in charge, so they know what I mean, that's the problem with fake news, is you can tell them all you want that this is the science and this is what we discovered. They have to believe it and believe that they can do something.
Okay, so it's like translate the science in a language that the other side can understand, right? So it is that, but with a purpose, right? You want to do that because what you want to do is to inform the other side, which in this case is policy, right? So it's the use of scientific knowledge, evidence, and expertise to inform public policy making. That's like the title, right? But I like to use the one from the JRC because it's this, but with a twist, because it talks about the set of competences and practices, not only about giving this knowledge, right? You need to have a set of competences to be able to do all of this. So these are the competences. that you need to have to be able to do science for policy. The most important one is understand policy. You really need to understand policy. Then you need to participate in policy making, communicate, engage with citizens and stakeholders, and collaborate. What is all of this? So each of these competencies has a lot of different skills. Oh, you didn't see the top ones. I don't know how to make it. Oh, yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Okay, so each of these competencies has different skills, right? So for understanding policy, you need to have policy relationships and networks. You need to participate in policy making. You need to have political sensitivity, and you need to be writing for policymakers. But to communicate, you need to be speaking with impact or storytelling. And to engage with citizens, well, you need to implement this engagement with the citizens, and to collaborate, you need to have empathy and emotion. So as you can imagine, one single person cannot do all of this. It's virtually impossible unless, I don't know, you're a superhero. So this is for institutions. If an institution wants to do science for policy, needs to make sure that you have teams that are covering all of this, and that these teams work in a collaborative way and they are coordinated. So the other message is that, oh, I do research and I wrote a report, so I do science for policy. Wrong. Because to be able to do science for policy, you need to understand the policy. Otherwise, your research might be super interesting, but might be not relevant for policy. So from an institutional perspective, this is the big picture that you need to take into consideration. But like, let's say where we are right now, right? BSc, you are gigantic. So how are you going to do that? You have a lot of different types of researchers, right? So, whoopsies. Why do I have this in here now? Okay, so these are the 4 idealized roles for scientists in decision making. And let me explain a little bit this. Okay, so we already talked about the linear model. Remember, I produced research. I gave you the research. Do whatever you want with the research. I gave you the truth, right? Then we have the stakeholder model, which is this collaborative model with based in co-creation, right? And now, democracy. We introduce democracy and the different views of democracy. So these 2 very complicated names. This is from political sciences. So I gave you a little translation here, which is like closed door politics, that the decisions are made mainly by experts. And then we have open door politics, where the decisions are shaped by broad participation and debate. And then we have these 4: pure scientist, an advocate, an arbiter, and a broker. So let's start by the pure scientist. The pure scientist is the scientist that doesn't really engage with policy. She or he wants to do research, fantastic, believes in a linear model, right? Like, I produce this. If someone wants to use it, perfect. If no one wants to use it, I don't really care. And this is the scientist that might be producing interesting science, relevant, but it might not be policy relevant. Then we have the advocate, or actually, yeah, let's go with the advocate. Then we have the advocate, which is a scientist that, no, let's go with this one. Let's go with the arbiter. Then we have the arbiter. The arbiter it's also producing science, right? And is engaging with policymaking, but it's just giving the information. It's not giving recommendations. It's not really engaging into the process. It's like, oh, I'm producing this report because the Department of Climate Change from La Generalitat asked me for this report. So that's what I'm doing right now. And then I will give them this report, and that's it, end of the relationship. And it's a report about facts, and it's not giving any type of recommendation. It's explaining this is happening, but it's not saying this is what we should be doing for this to stop happening. Then we have the advocate. The advocate is the one that is pushing for a perspective. It's like, my science is saying that we should be doing this. So I want you to be doing this. The advocate is usually NGOs based on science. They are defending one perspective, and that's the perspective that they're pushing into the political agendas, right? And then we have the honest broker or the knowledge broker, which is the scientist that is giving you the science, the information, but is also giving you a translation into these are all the options that you have, and these are all the trade-offs that you have depending on the option. And this is what is going to happen if you do this, but this is what is going to happen if you do this, and this is what is going to happen if you do this. And this is the consensus here, this is the consensus there, this is the consensus there. And these are all the different recommendations depending on your path, right? So they're usually in an institution, these four types of people are together. And it's not that one is better than the other one. There's not a right type and a wrong type. The four of them are equally important, but the most important thing for you from an institutional perspective is to know where you are. Because if you know where you are, then it's way easier to build teams, and it's way easier to go back to that model that I was showing you before about this collaborative perspective. Hello. Okay. So let's go to something that usually people don't know that well, or is more like unknown, or like people have known, like, have you ever heard science diplomacy before, the term? Yeah. Okay. So let's start separating the terms. What is science? I love it. Well, so
Okay, yeah.
So usually when I give this talk and I have like students that are not from science, and I say, what is science? It's like, nobody knows what to say. And I always give them this quote just to make them laugh. So science actually is not like I mean, yeah, why not? But, so science is based on knowledge and understanding, right? We have like a methodology. We follow like evidence-based, and it's connected with the physical world, its phenomena, blah, 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 blah. We are all scientists, so we all know it. What about diplomacy? What is diplomacy?
Diplomacy is an art. Diplomacy is how to get people to work together without causing problems.
Oh, I love it.
I grew up in Washington, D.C. It's all about diplomacy.
My daughter was born in Washington, D.C. She's a great diplomat.
See?
And she's 9. So I really like this quote that it's attributed to Winston Churchill, but I don't think that he was the one saying it, but there is a diplomat is a person who can tell you to go to hell in such a way that you actually look forward to the trip, right? And then you have this one that is an ambassador, is an honest man sent to lie abroad for the good of his country. This is usually the perspective that people have about diplomacy, right? And so the traditional perspective about diplomacy is this management of relationships between independent states for like pushing their own like foreign affairs agendas, basically, right? So, and the states, when they engage in diplomacy, they usually do it through these officials that are trained specifically for these types of relationships. But now we have what we call the adjectivized diplomacies, right? Science diplomacy is one of them, but there are many others. So in case of science diplomacy, of course, is not associated to this definition. It's like a wider definition of diplomacy that includes another type of agents, another type of actors that are not trained specifically in diplomacy, although some of us are, I am, and they are in particular scientists. So if we have diplomacy on one side and science on the other side, right? These are more or less different perspectives of the same thing, depending on which side you are, right? Like diplomacy is the balancing of power, stability, but science is change. And you have also experimentation. Diplomacy is very conventional. And in diplomacy, you don't like risks. And in science, well, it's more risk tolerance. Diplomacy is a practice. You practice diplomacy, right? And in science, we have also theory and we have facts and data. But in diplomacy, it's a constant argument. You want influence, you want persuasion, there's tacts. You have negotiations and compromise. And in science, you have trial and error. Diplomacy is highly political. And science is apolitical, ideally, right? And then you have the diplomacy is practiced in the polis, and science is more practiced in the lab. So Copeland, in this article, Guerrilla Diplomacy, basically what he was saying is that to be able to do science diplomacy, you need to combine both. Otherwise, you cannot advance in science diplomacy, especially nowadays that we have all of these global challenges that they all have like a science-based, but in order to be able to tackle them, to address them, you need this diplomacy component as well, because there are transboundary issues, because not a single state is going to solve any of these things by themselves, right? So this is a history perspective of this. I'm going to go really quick. It's basically that this is not a new thing. I think that the first time that the term was published in a publication was around 2005. But of course, scientific cooperation across borders has been happening for a very long time. In fact, like the English government was one of the first governments that started sending science attachés to their embassies since the 1700s. And there's also activities and policies that go back to the 19th century, and science diplomacy was also a thing in the aftermath of World War II. So going back to what is science diplomacy, usually science diplomacy is defined in 3 dimensions, right? You have diplomacy for science, you have science for diplomacy, and you have science in diplomacy. These are the 3 dimensions of science diplomacy. So science for diplomacy is very intuitive, right? It's like when you have like maybe different countries that they're not talking to each other, or they are talking to each other, but their relationships are unstable, or you want to reinforce these relationships between these states, and then you use science to be able to do that. One example is IAI, but I'm going to give you something that maybe it's more relevant for the geopolitics today. I don't know if you know this research center, Sesame. Sesame is a research center that is here. So, and it was basically a center where the researchers were coming from Cyprus, Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Egypt, Iran, Pakistan, and Turkey. So, and the whole idea of Sesame was to build trust through science among all of these countries that I just named.
Yeah, if you want something more, the background of Sesame, and that is actually a donation that the European Center for Particle Physics made to this, let's say, consortium of a synchrotron. So there is a synchrotron, and Germany was very much putting money into that. So to move the synchrotron from Geneva to Jordan, to the Jordan capital. And at that time, the geopolitical situation was different. So we put Iran and Pakistan, those people behind that. Now, of course, it's a different story. Then, if you like, the synchrotron was the
origin,
enabling factor to go there. And then when you're there, with the synchrotron like we have here in Alba,
yeah,
you have these experimental lines, but then the various countries mentioned were sending people to scientific research on the experimentality, and that is still ongoing.
Yeah. And hopefully for a long time, but let's see.
Well, I mean, I have some doubt about, the sustainability of the hardware, because the donation was done something like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. So then we have diplomacy for science, and I'm going to actually, because we were talking about synchrotrons and we were talking about all of this, I'm going to give you this other example. So it's like when diplomacy facilitates international science cooperation, right? So I think that you all know CERN, and you all probably know that the facilities cross 3 different borders. So to be able to create that, like at least 3 different countries needed to like engage in diplomatic relationships to be able to build it. And then we have.
If you want me to shut down.
No, go ahead.
But because there is another interesting example from CERN. So CERN expanded Europe in advance to the expansion of the European Union. So Czech Republic, Slovak, I mean, all, let's say, the former Soviet Union, Eastern countries, they joined CERN before joining the European Union, and being part of CERN facilitated the process of entering.
Yeah. And there's been a lot of controversy.
It's an example of science diplomacy.
Exactly.
So you start with a scientific operation, and eventually the politician follows.
Exactly.
Not always, sometimes.
But it's like one of the best examples, CERN, on, yeah.
There is also an entire part of the European Commission, which I think report to ISPRA, report to the Joint Research Center in ISPRA,
Yeah.
which is entirely dedicated to science diplomacy. I don't know if you are in contact with them.
I am with Jan Marco Mueller, but I think that he is not part of this particular department.
So it is a strong, I mean, since Europe decided to stop the nuclear power, they don't know what to do with ISPRA. Okay? So one of the many reincarnations of ISPRA is also the science diplomacy. I can give it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So then we have science in diplomacy, which is the thing that probably most of you either know, engage, and it's more intuitive, which is basically when you have once you have science inside policy processes, informing with scientific advice, right? And these are the main examples. I think that a lot of you are involved in IPCC. we are involved mainly in IPBES and MEDEC. And so going back to what the hell is science diplomacy, right? Is basically there's no one single definition. This is an umbrella term, and there's a lot of different definitions depending on the perspective. That's why the best way to explain science diplomacy is by going back to these 3 dimensions. And by the way, now there's like a 4th dimension being discussed, which is diplomacy in science. But like academics are still discussing if that's a thing or it's not a thing, but I will keep you posted. And in this umbrella definition, there's also this like boundary problem, right? Because you are bringing together actors that belong to different social worlds. And let's say that traditional diplomats and the traditional perspective of diplomacy is not always welcome to acknowledge that scientists suddenly are an actor in diplomacy, right? So, and sometimes they like us there and sometimes they don't. But my point with all of that is that I showed you before the collaborative process that is not linear, is more like engaging and stakeholder, but now we are in an international space. And what we have is that we have the international political scientific context that is very important to know, like geopolitics, right? All the things that we were saying now about like World War II and what is happening right now with Israel and Gaza is affecting what is happening in Sesame. So you really need to have this geopolitical context, because this is going to interfere with whatever is happening in science diplomacy. So, and the science diplomacy space is right here, right? You have like the, of course, scientific knowledge, but you have the politics and you have whatever problem is happening on this geopolitics mess that is constantly changing. And I'm just going to like, well, who is practicing? So of course the states, right? Because of influence, cooperation, global challenges, but it's also scientists and diplomats with a portfolio that includes science and technology, networks of scientists, and then we have non-state actors, which it could be like us, right? Like academics and academic organizations, individual scientists, international organizations. And this is the how, right? So you have scientific advice that informs international diplomacy, and that goes to science cooperation and goes back. And it's like constantly moving and constantly interchanging. So, well, this is a beautiful phrase from a beautiful woman that I admire a lot, Frances Colon, that says that integrating science into the diplomacy is essential for addressing global challenges and promoting peace and prosperity. And this is my last slide, which is what we are doing at CREAF. Okay, so we at CREAF, we work in science for policy and science diplomacy at different scales. We go from the subnational scale, local and regional, then we have the national scale, and then we go level. So this is a multi-level strategy. In each level, we have different partners that help us with different purposes, right? So at the local level, we collaborate with the Barcelona City Hall, the metropolitan area of Barcelona, right? And we give them, for instance, if you have noticed that the plans in parks and rotaries in Barcelona have changed, is because we advise them on changing to plants that were more drought resistant, but also better for pollinators. So this is one of the things that we're doing, right? So this is pure scientific advice on better do this instead of that, it's good for pollinators, it's good for this, it's good for that. At the regional level, we of course collaborate with La Generalitat de Catalunya, of course, and we have the secretariat of the Observatori del Patrimoni Natural y la Biodiversitat. This is an observatory that monitors biodiversity at the regional level and connect with other observatories in Europe. Then national level, I mean, I think that you know all of this. We basically connect with all MITECO, of course, but also all the other institutions that either do science for policy or that they are doing cooperation. Europe, we have a lot of different projects, but most of the projects that we are involved, these are CSAs. So it's not only research projects, it's like projects that they're dedicated to this knowledge transfer basically, and how to improve this knowledge transfer inside the Commission. We have a full strategy dedicated to the Mediterranean with 3 different pillars: science for science, science for policy, and science for business. And we are involved in MEDEC. And then at the global level, we are observers of UNFCCC, of CBD, of IPBES. We are in the way of becoming observers of IPCC and UNCCD, which is the certification. We are scientific advisors of the Mediterranean Climate Action Partnership and scientific advisors of Regions 4, which is an intergovernmental organization at the subnational level, and we advise them on biodiversity. On top of being in all of this, we also have authors in IPBES and IPCC and MEDEC. So this is our big picture. I have no idea for how long I have been talking, but if you have questions, comments.
And we can start by clapping you.
This is my last slide.
It's an obvious question. How many people do you have?
Doing that at CREAF, my department, we're 3 people. And that depends on